Okay, returned Salvo's been fired in this North Carolina bathroom law. The state of North Carolina, along with, I guess, the university, public universities that accept Title IX funds from North Carolina, still have to issue a written response to the Department of Justice's letter indicating that they will be subject to having federal funds withheld if they don't repeal or reverse or state that they will not enforce this particular law. The state has fired back with a lawsuit challenging the Justice Department's quote-unquote interpretation of the law. The problem with that is that the Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit, I believe it is, that covers North Carolina and Virginia, has already ruled in favor of transgender people having the right to use restroom facilities of their own sexual identity. Okay. Also, I did a video yesterday, I guess it might be up this morning, indicating that this was a law that was in search of a problem instead of the other way around. To be honest with you, I'm saying to myself, fuck McCrory. He could have left this whole thing alone. Charlotte enacted laws to grant protection for the transgender people, and if the law only granted protection for them and there wasn't anything that you could hang your hat on as far as transgender people abusing the protection, you should have left this alone. Now, I really want the federal government to tell North Carolina, the state of North Carolina, to go fuck themselves by withholding funds in the form of DOT or Department of Transportation funds for road and highway construction and any other federal funds that come in. Now, I'm not all that hot on them withholding Title IX funds if the University of North Carolina sends a signal that they are not in favor of the law and basically want to turn a blind eye until this whole thing gets settled. Here's the latest information this morning regarding North Carolina and their filing of a lawsuit.
In New York, let's begin with North Carolina's defiant stand against the federal government over its controversial transgender bathroom law. The state has just filed a lawsuit against the federal government, and Governor McCrory is set to hold a news conference this afternoon. In the last hour, the governor's office released a statement reading in part, "This action is a result of the Obama administration's interpretation of federal law. The Obama administration is bypassing Congress by attempting to rewrite the law and set restroom policies for public and private employers across the country."
Now, doesn't McCrory look like a goddamn maniac with his mouth open like that? They picked a perfect picture to interpose that message over.
Not just North Carolina. The lawsuit comes hours before the deadline for the state to respond to the letter from the Justice Department challenging the legality of the law. Letters sent last week to Governor McCrory and other state officials said it could not be implemented because it violates the Civil Rights Act. So far, the Justice Department has not responded to the breaking news this morning of this lawsuit file. Let's get to the breakdown, though. NBC Justice correspondent Pete Williams, who's been following the latest on this lawsuit, including the governor's name actually listed, which you have said in the past, it's kind of a telltale, perhaps.
Right. The lawyers often think about how to caption these cases, and it is styled. It's going to be forever known as McCrory versus U.S. It's filed in the name of the governor and the head of the Department of Public Safety in North Carolina against the U.S., the Attorney General, and the acting head of the Civil Rights Division. What it says is that the government is misreading federal law, that federal civil rights law this lawsuit maintains does not provide protection for transgender status. The government had argued in its letter that it's illegal to engage in sex discrimination, and discrimination against transgender status is sex discrimination because it makes distinctions based on sex. So that's the legal issue here. The governor has allied himself with this position of the state that the Justice Department is wrong, that it's misreading the law. What the lawsuit says is, if the Justice Department thinks that's what the law should be, then it should ask for Congress's to change the law. Now, interestingly, this lawsuit is filed by private law firms on behalf of the governor. In other words, the state went out and hired a private law firm, a couple of them, to file this lawsuit because the state attorney general had said earlier he would not defend this law that was passed in March, this transgender status law, that's so-called bathroom law that also limits legal protections for LGBT people. Similarly, the Attorney General Roy Cooper, who was running against the governor, also refused to defend the state's ban on same-sex marriage before the Supreme Court ruled. Now, the lawsuit does not mention, studiously, I think, a decision by the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, which includes North Carolina last month in a transgender case involving a high school student from Virginia. That case went to the Fourth Circuit, and the Fourth Circuit said, you know what, Title VII of the Title IX of the Civil Rights Act, the law that bars sex discrimination in public schools, does forbid discrimination against transgender people. So there is at least a panel decision of the Fourth Circuit that is at odds with this lawsuit, and in a way that is the law of the circuit. So the state is to some extent going against at least that decision, which is on appeal, Tamara.
And in this statement that we read, Pete, from the governor's office, making this an issue, they say it represents a debate across the country, not just North Carolina. When you look at the polls out there, which I know you're a reporter, you get caught up in the polling, but 57% of Americans oppose these laws. And when asked, had someone been prosecuted or had there been an issue in North Carolina of people trying to go into restrooms and some of these accusations, the governor could not answer why this was so important and why he felt this legislation was so needed.
That's an interesting point. It frankly cuts both ways. The lawsuit mentions that very fact. It says nobody has claimed discrimination under this law. No one's tried to get a transgender protection and been denied it. And so both sides are citing that fact. The opponents of this law are saying, what's the big deal? Why is this passed in the first place if it's such a non-issue? Today in this lawsuit, the governor's basically saying, I don't understand why the Justice Department is making this such a big issue. No one's claiming discrimination.
All right, we'll see what happens. The governor is expected to speak at 1 p.m. Eastern time today, and we'll carry that. Thank you, Pete.
All right. My take on this is, if nobody had done anything, as far as the state was concerned, nothing would have happened here. The state is basically saying they want to be proactive to have a law on the books to stop something from happening. The federal government is coming back and saying, stop something from happening. This is discrimination. Okay. Now, bottom line is there are already laws on the books, okay, against people, that's male and female, using restroom facilities to violate privacy. I.e., that's a male going into a restroom, even a male restroom, and taking any kind of pictures, recordings, etc. Same thing applies to women going into restrooms and taking any kind of recordings or pictures. There's already a law against that. Okay, I believe it's called a peeping Tom law, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, and that's all across 50 states. So now, if anything other than, I guess, pictures, audio occurs, that's direct physical contact, okay? And obviously there are laws already on the books for that. So whether you're a transgender person or not, you violate any of those and you can be prosecuted and will go to jail. So actually the laws are not necessary. Now, you know, in women's bathrooms, obviously there are stalls. And they talk about women's bathrooms being specially outfitted for women versus men. That's a bunch of bullshit. The only difference between a male restroom and a female restroom is in male restrooms there are urinals for guys to stand up and take a whiz, whereas in the ladies' restrooms there are basically to use the facilities. They're all stalled with, with doors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so this guy's going to lose. North Carolina's going to lose this lawsuit, and Tamron did mention that the loss that the state of Virginia suffered in their Virginia case is being appealed. Guess where it's being appealed to? That's right, the 4 versus 4 on the Supreme Court. And since the 4 versus 4, if they can't come to a solid decision, i.e. 5-3, one way or the other, then the lower court's ruling will stand. And in this case, the teenager in Virginia his decision favoring him. Well, it's a girl using a boys' restroom. Actually, the girl will be able to use the boys' restroom because that's the gender that she identifies with. So I don't understand North Carolina's strategy on this one. They know damn well they got to go back up into the 4th District Court in order to basically win the lawsuit against the federal government. They already know that the 4th District Court has already sided on this issue in Virginia, and they know that even if they lose this, the Supreme Court is probably going to split 4-4 on this thing, and they will lose. Meanwhile, what the feds need to do to put the heat on these guys is to start withholding funds from the state of North Carolina until this thing is heard. Now, obviously, with that going on, there's going to be an expedited hearing over this. But even then, it's going to be at least several months before a decision is made, and several months of having funds held up to North Carolina, together with the business community really fighting hard against North Carolina. They're going to see the light of day. The pressure is going to be too great for them to not do something, at least to enact something that states that they will withhold enforcement of the law until all the lawsuits are over, which should be able to cure their ability to obtain funds from the Fed for Title IX, which is the University of North Carolina and all schools in North Carolina, and also Department of Transportation funds. So we're going to see. But this to me is super interesting, and the reason I'm so hot on this is McCrory is a prick. This is the same guy who indicated that he wasn't going to do anything in regard to the abortion laws in North Carolina, and then he turned around when the legislature came through. He turned around and broke his word on that. He also said he really didn't have any major opinion on the same-sex marriage. Okay, he broke his word on that. The Supreme Court turned around and got him on that. And he's the same prick that has instituted so many voter discrimination laws, making it harder for people to vote. And the March for Moral Mondays is on him on that. So I'm waiting for a court case to come down. But that's why you gotta get these Republicans out of fucking office, because the one decent thing about Republicans is they are fairly physically responsible. But as far as their ability to empathize with people over social issues, it's like totally non-existent.